Welcome to the 2D AP Art and Design portfolios, where each student has created a video to share their personal artistic journey. Hi, I'm Linda Kim, and it is my privilege to share with you about our experience this year. But before we view the students' presentations, it is helpful to understand the challenge that College Board requires of them in the AP Art and Design program. Students are asked to come up with an open-ended question or inquiry to guide their art making in what's called a sustained investigation, or SI for short. This selected inquiry is the basis and guiding principle for every choice and artistic action made in the creation of the work. Students are also required to demonstrate a high degree of technical skill, a clear synthesis of materials, processes, and ideas, and sustained investigation through practice, experimentation, and revision. Final portfolios include finished pieces, process documentation, and written information about the work presented. There are no restrictions on choices of media or subject matter to enable students to freely root their investigation in what they are most curious and passionate about, resulting in powerful and personal bodies of work. The art inquiry cycle is a lot like the scientific method, where students research, observe, analyze, and experiment to address their questions. College Board also asked students to write a 1,200-character statement, as well as written evidence about each slide. The writing helps to explain the ways in which their work demonstrates artistic practice and thinking. In addition to the sustained investigation, students must also submit 5 selected works that represent the student's technical best, as well as showcase a synthesis of materials and ideas. And now, please enjoy the students' presentations.
This summer, I explored many different ideas of what my inquiry could be about. As I spent the summer down the shore, in a town that I grew up in, I was inspired by such a beautiful place. From that, I came to the conclusion that my memories from my childhood are very important to me, which is exactly something I would want to spend my junior year creating art about. Ultimately, I decided that my inquiry statement would be, how can I hold on to my childhood as I grow up? I remember my sister and I, how we would always bike to this abandoned house. We absolutely loved going there because we would always imagine who might have lived there in the past. In color, I would have us and the abandoned house in black and white to show how it remains in the past. So I added an image of my current self grabbing onto the house, peering into the scene. That shows how I'm literally beginning to peer back into my childhood and in a sense holding on to it. This next piece, I wanted to do a scene of my siblings and I fishing. My siblings would appear to be enjoying the scene, yet I seem to be focused somewhere else. This is all supposed to show how I struggled to enjoy the present moments of my childhood because I'm so focused on the future. In this next piece, I wanted to build off the idea of time. I wanted to show how my family, like in my last piece, really does help me hold on to my childhood. So there's my mom and I hugging while a bunch of clocks are warped around us. It's the connection between my mom and I prevails through time. Fast forward to December. At this point, I was really starting to struggle with brainstorming different ideas. At the time, Christmas was just around the corner, and that's when I had a little photo shoot with my siblings. I decided on this final image of my sister, and each reflection had to be perfect, and each aspect of the face had to be carefully drawn. I also knew that my sister would be pretty mad at me if I messed up the nose. This next piece was even harder to come up with than the last one. A random idea popped into my head. I thought of that scene from Alice in Wonderland where Alice is growing out of the house. It made me think of growing up and growing out of old spaces in a figurative sense. I thought it would be cool to take that idea more literally by showing myself physically growing out of my childhood bedroom. When it came to my last piece, I felt a lot of pressure to make it perfect. I thought that my inquiry needed some sort of conclusion. I started brainstorming by gathering a bunch of meaningful objects from my childhood. But then I realized it's not the objects that were important, it was what I do with them that matters. So then I decided to stuff them into a suitcase and have them overflowing out of it, showing how I will always carry pieces of my childhood, hold on to them wherever my life takes me. All the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray. Overall, all of my pieces aligned with what was going on in my life at the moment and the internal struggles I was presently facing, and that really helped me keep a natural flow throughout my investigation. It definitely wasn't easy, but I'm proud of what I did this year. My portfolio is very special to me, and this experience was something that I'll always cherish.
Hey, my name is Ryan, and here is my AP Studio Art 2 journey. My year started with lengthy debates on what my inquiry would focus on. I was settled on exploring my life as an only child, but Miss Kim was not a fan. She advised me to begin mind mapping, a process I was unfamiliar with. Hours of mind mapping led me to realize that, for some odd reason, I've always been fascinated with America's consumerism, despite having minimal personal connections with it. I had already made several pieces in AP Art 1, which included consumer products as the subject matter, or works that highlighted the corrupt nature of the consumerist world. And with that, my inquiry became, how does American consumerism affect individuals' lives? This led me to begin my AP 2 year with a surreal colored pencil work which switched the position of the production line with factory workers, to tie back into the corruption I had shown in previous works. I then explored further how factories operated in corrupt ways, dehumanizing and mistreating American workers. I began to question who else may have been impacted by factories' harm, so I started to research. A lot. Scrolling on the web led me to find a small town in West Virginia. The water source had been damaged and mishandled by a factory. The tap water in the town had hazardous chemicals in it, and it led many residents to get cancer. One resident, Susie Worley Jenkins, was diagnosed on 3 different occasions with cancer. I initially created a portrait of Susie, however, it didn't completely demonstrate my technical skills very well. I ended up revising it and made it into a colored pencil drawing of the water jugs which many residents resorted to using in order to avoid the hazardous tap water. Shortly after this revision, I was on a tour of MICA in Baltimore, and I had an artistic awakening, thanks to Pinterest. I realized that I desperately wanted to explore using a cartoon style, so out of the blue, I changed my next project to be in a completely new style. The watercolor work surprised Miss Kim, and I was fairly impressed with it. All that I needed to do for the revisions was add more watercolor. But then, disaster struck. I added white gesso. I mistook the white gesso for clear gesso foolishly, and I had to completely restart. I said, what the heck, and took the opportunity to try out Procreate. The piece turned out better than it had even looked before. I was super pleased, and so was Miss Kim. This work demonstrated how society and consumerism had been angering the environment and was the first of many satirical humor comics I would create. With digital under my belt, I felt free to try and experiment more. I started to sample by allegorically comparing animals to different social classes. Pigs represented wealthy individuals of the world, sheep represented the lower class, and eventually rats would represent New York City's greedy workers. As the year started to close, I missed working with physical mediums and gave it one last shot. My inquiry had led me to realize that American consumerism is extremely complex, confusing, and overall crazy. My last work demonstrated that the entire capitalistic society will forever confuse me, and there are an infinite number of ways in which consumerism affects individuals' lives. That's all for now. Thank you for watching my inquiry journey.
Hi, I'm Noah, and I'm going to be taking you through the journey of my sustained investigation for AP Art. Last year, Ms. Hart reintroduced us to watercolor, and we painted local gardens and buildings and natural elements around us. And I loved using watercolor so much that over the summer, I also painted more special places like the beach, New Orleans, and my house. For my first sustained investigation piece, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I did know I wanted to include watercolor and the same gardens that I painted last year in AP1. I was having some issues with composition, so Miss Kim showed me some books by Jan Brett to show me the way she lays out her page and adds borders and vignettes. I was inspired by these books to create a winter scene for my first piece, and I picked an animal to create an illustrative border with. This was the piece that I came up with. The idea behind this piece was how can I encapsulate my memories through vessels of my childhood, and this piece being a snow globe from the collection that my dad helped me build by going on work trips. As you can see, this piece lacks a strong composition, and there are many random elements like my backyard, the door in the snow globe, and the birds and winter leaves as the border, so I needed to figure out from here what each of those things meant to me. The first thing I thought of was how could I connect this to my family, because I knew I wanted to create some sort of piece about family memories or family history or family members. Something that I could easily connect to my family was the birds that I used in my border, because my grandpa as a teenager would birdwatch and draw birds from observation. From this point on, I thought I was going to base most of my pieces off of childhood memories and incorporate the birds as an Easter egg referencing my grandpa. I then created new layouts focusing on nature, birds, and childhood memories, making myself the main subject. This was the idea that I settled on, and this was the piece that I created from it. The only new development in my inquiry was through this piece I focused on how children's books could spark my imagination. I decided I wanted my pieces to have a central character so I could build worlds around them like many of my favorite children's books did. I was pretty confident with making my subject a bird, but then I realized it was difficult to personify them because they don't really have arms or legs. So I looked through my children's books for some inspiration. I found that some of my favorite books as a kid included a mouse as their character, like these. I really liked this idea also because the dollhouse figures that I used to play with were mice. These two childhood elements were enough to convince me to start to illustrate mice. From here, I experimented with a completely new medium and style. I created this piece using references of my dollhouse furniture and dollhouse figures. I really liked this new medium and the technique that I was using. However, I was having some issues with perspective, so Miss Kim offered me the idea of creating a completely flat piece with vignettes surrounding the character with no perspective at all. Sort of like this. I also wanted to tie my family back into my work, so in this piece, the character is based off of my grandpa and his love for fishing. I was having fun experimenting with different media, so I wanted to try one that I hadn't ever tried before. In this piece, I used embroidery, which is a hobby of my grandma's. At this point, I felt like my investigation and inquiry were really coming together, so I decided to continue to illustrate this mouse character in different environments, styles, and with different personalities. The final piece that I presented was actually created as a revision of the first piece that I ever made for this investigation. I decided to place it last because I felt like it displayed all of the different directions that I went throughout my inquiry. After many concept sketches, a few breakdowns, and some proactive talks with Miss Kim and my AP art friends, I came up with my final inquiry statement. How can I find my voice as an aspiring children's book illustrator through the experimentation of different media, styles, and techniques? To end this video, I'd really love to thank Miss Kim for all of her help getting me through this, Miss Hart for helping me last year and this year with my whole art journey, Miss Neidick for helping me with all the technical difficulties in College Board, and all of my friends in art class and outside of art class, and my parents.
Now, let's start from the beginning, shall we? In the summer, I was very certain what my inquiry would be about. It would be about this. Something related to my written world I had been working on for years. I wanted to explore this world, so for my summer project, I collected objects I thought my character would have and arranged them into a still life. When the year started, I did not have a central inquiry line that I wanted to explore. I felt burnout from working on one project for way too long. I had a bunch of concept sketches, but none of them called to me. Finally, I decided I would start in a more general fiction sense before narrowing down into something more specific and personal. I wanted to draw from the imaginative nature of being someone who creates and illustrate a typical scene with fantasy elements within it. Also, during this time, I had injured my wrist, so I decided to do this project digitally to make it easier. This was, in all honesty, a gargantuan misstep. While now I love digital art, I was inexperienced at the time and didn't like the result. I decided to leave the project where it was and move on, hoping to come back to it. While my first project outlined how a writer could change their environment, I wanted to show how one could be influenced by the environment. During this time, I went to Greenwood Gardens and was utterly transported to a different world. The enclosed nature, separate from the outside world, filled with sounds of bugs, birds, and life, was, in all senses of the word, inspiring. I had decided my next project would surround this mysterious and majestic place. At first, I wanted to include a dichotomy between a character and myself. That idea, though, for lack of a better phrase, was very bad. I attempted the layering in my sketchbook and found no matter what medium I used, it just looked clunky. I refocused to what I really wanted to show, which was inspiration from the environment, collaging images I took from the garden digitally, then sketching and painting them into a collage. I then used acetate to add the fictional and writing elements on top, keeping them in a separate plane to show how fiction and reality, while can be seen together, were ultimately different. This is a theme I carry throughout my entire project. Continuing with the idea of inspiration, I instead decided to choose my experiences. One experience I wanted to highlight was archery. I have been taking archery lessons for around 3 years at this time, and I wanted to show how this sport related to fantasy. It's universally used to relate to stories. Katniss Everdeen, Legolas, Robin Hood, the list writes itself. It was an easy medium between fiction and reality. For this piece, I decided to incorporate book pages from one of my favorite books, The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland. I ripped the pages and used them as lenses of fiction. In this piece, fantasy and reality were now united into one plane but still not incorporated together. I used my 2 previous pieces to inspire my next piece, featuring me as a character, continuing the idea that reality affects fiction. This idea that I could use myself as both me and a character intrigued me as to continue developing. At first, I had just used myself because it was the easiest reference to guess, but now I also learned that creating self-portraits add more depth to the piece. I used toned paper and black colored pencil to look like a traveler's journal, and the writing was a reaction, as if a journal entry, as if a prop in a story. After this, I decided to revisit my first piece. I incorporated traditional Chinese motifs because I wanted to show how my culture impacts my writing. I redid the piece in line and wash and did digital touch-ups. I decided to lean full into the cultural aspects I used in my redo piece into my next one. I researched a lot of Chinese storytelling methods like opera face mask, but ultimately decided to do a horizontal scroll. For this, I reused the dragon I had used in multiple times in previous pieces. I created one continuous scene, taking the same deity character from my previous piece and adding Chinese influences to it, which in this situation means using photos of me in a hanfu or traditional Chinese outfit as the reference. I added a traditional last name stamp and wrote some words in my own replacement language I had created months ago for my writing project that started the whole journey. At this point, reality and fiction were completely mixed together. For my last project, I wanted to conclude the journey. I wanted to use the Chinese cultural influences as a base, but create a project that showed both the creative process and the stories that had so deeply influenced me. I decided to format the pieces like a Chinese couplet hung on doors during Chinese New Year. These are created using 4 characters, and I similarly used 4 scenes per panel. I created one panel outlining how I create stories. The second panel shows scenes from my stories. And similarly, how I changed from writing has changed my reality. I used somewhat limited colors, emphasizing reds and yellows because those colors represent good luck in Chinese. Then, I photoshopped the pieces onto an image of my front door for the final presentation. This piece concludes my portfolio. Through its process of creation, like using friends and schools as reference, basing my stories in high school, and being inspired by my culture, showed how deeply connected fiction and reality are. While I draw so much inspiration from the world around me to create, the world around me also feels like a story, one in which I get to write. The people around me, my friends, family, acquaintances, classmates, teachers, mentors, everyone is part of this story. My room, archery range, town, they're all just settings for this adventure. This art portfolio helps contextualize all this and illustrate a very small chapter in this book. Thank you.
Good morning, it's an amazing day. It is completely dark outside, and it is way too late for me to be doing this. Anyway, let's just try this again. Welcome to my SI. I'm Finlay Jr. in Milburn High School. You know that already, though, so I'm not going to go into too much of that. AP2 was important. I loved it. I got to do a lot of what I wanted to do, which was basically just follow my story of my character Ash that we will go into in a second. AP2 basically consisted of drawing, staying up late, procrastinating, and drinking a lot of energy drinks because I don't like coffee. But that's besides the point. Anyway, for all the AP ones in there, good luck. This is going to be a very just honest conversation about my amazing SI, and I don't care anymore, so I'm just going to say everything about it. First piece that I did, it just encapsulates a lot about Ash. Oh, my bad. Let's talk about Ash. Ash is 17 years old, living in a 2056 futuristic world that I created, basically overrun by this zombie apocalypse that was created by this big antagonist that's probably going to be really short but really strong for some reason. Anyway, so that I didn't make yet, but it's gonna happen eventually because I want to create a story on this, but that's besides the point. Ash has powers. Everyone has powers. They're all personalized to the specific characters that we see. So in this, they all have powers. They didn't show them yet, but they all do have powers. And really, it's just really cool. And I just created it myself, and I really liked it. And I just followed throughout my SI with a bunch of different questions that I didn't create, but I answered in order to make Ash this really just like this person that everyone can relate to no matter what. So that was important. First piece shows a lot of hobbies that Ash has, personality traits that we could see, colors that are important, and we could also see this little monster in the back here, can't we? Next we have a lighting style in a realistic style that I realized I don't like for a comic, and never did it again, except for a skeletal anatomy study that we'll briefly go over later. Anyway, we could see the monsters' heads here, and later in this piece, we can see the monsters with a more elongated body because they're zombies. So you know how that works. With the personalized powers that we could see Ash like acknowledging the monsters there. The monsters represent mental health issues, but they're obviously physical beings that we could see. Next we have a character study that I created to really further understand Ash and like who they are really, with a bunch of different expressions, clothes and stuff. Next here, and in my next piece that we'll see, we have I put Ash in the real world, so this is my room previously. It's a lot different now because, I put Ash in the real world. I did the line art on paper, like actual paper. You don't see that much here. With fountain pen observationally to really give it the more realistic feel to separate fantasy and reality. Same with the next one here. You could see it's a city. It's New York City. I just took a reference photo and it took me way too long to draw. Anyway, we have this skeletal anatomy study that we talked about before. Okay, final piece. I revised the first piece that we saw. This piece really just encapsulates the art style that I've learned, really adapting to what my SI and really just like body of work has adapted to, and really just like put everything that I could into this. Honestly, that's it. Thank you for watching. This was very difficult to make. I'm going to bed. Good night.
Step into my exhibition, where I delve into the intricacies of human connections and the cultural differences that shape our understanding of them. Having lived across the globe, I have developed a deep curiosity about how connections are formed, what they mean, and how they are influenced by contemporary factors such as technology and social media. Initially, I set out to solely explore connections between individuals, using different media to match their personalities. However, I soon realized that within the process, to truly convey what being connected means to me, I need to also explore the flip side and the nuances of being disconnected. In my investigation, I examined how we cope with the distance, keeping up with different approaches to connection, and the stress it can cause. This first piece is titled Nomad, and it was created using a combination of layered Micron fine tip pens and watercolor. The inspiration behind this piece came from my own sentiments of what it means to be home, and what location can mean to an individual. What I find particularly interesting about this artwork is how I incorporated the faces of people that were within the environment that I was in at the time, and now looking back to it, I still remember the experiences I had while making it. This next piece is titled Family, and it was created using a combination of poster markers, Sharpies, cards, cutouts from vintage lifestyle magazines, sheet music I found under my dresser, and watercolor. The inspiration behind this piece came from collages I saw in an art magazine from the 2000s. I wanted to convey the conventional ideals and imagery of a household, as well as the other types of connections that can also be called a family. For example, the use of connected zigzag lines creates a sense of complication and depth, while the use of fuzzy pastel watercolor adds a touch of warmth and nostalgia. This third piece is titled Distracted, and it was created using a combination of digital collage to create the layout and acrylic paint for the final version of the piece. The inspiration behind this piece came from a photo I took of an elderly couple waiting for their brunch orders at the Marilyn Monroe Diner. After looking back at the photo I took, I realized that it had the potential to depict the changing scenery of how connections are held. I intentionally used a classic medium of acrylic paint to emphasize the surreal yet real scene between the old woman and the man, who was modified into a phone. What I find particularly notable about this artwork is how the woman is connected to an IV drip, symbolizing how her life is fleeting, while the phone is connected to a cable to show how text messages, social media, and memories on devices are eternal. It speaks to me on a personal level because within my own family and in other families, I see a similar scene of where one or all of the family members at the table are fixated on their devices to pass time. I believe that this artwork has the ability to connect with others in a similar way. This fourth piece is titled Checkmates, and it was created using a combination of newspaper, color, plastic film, undeveloped film, acrylic paint, and string. The inspiration behind this piece came from a photo I took of a man playing chess at the Union Square Market, as well as the events happening at the time I was creating the piece. I wanted to convey the connections between people from different backgrounds and culture, but still them holding a bond through one similar interest, and this is reflected in the design and composition of the piece. As you can see, I used a media full of color, which was carefully chosen to illustrate the feeling of connection and the sharing of different experiences. This next piece is titled Organism, and it was created using a combination of micron pen and watercolor. The inspiration behind this piece came from the composition of cells within an organism as well as the mitosis that occurs within it. I wanted to convey how human connections also function as an organism where the couples or individuals are within their own cells. And these people all function together to create a working community, yet there is still a sense of separation between each of the people, just like cells. This sixth piece is titled Disconnect, and the inspiration behind this piece came from a conversation I had with Miss Kim about how I could fully depict a figure who is trying yet is physically unable to connect. I wanted to create a piece where a figure would be completely isolated, and Miss Kim and I both decided that a cut-up, outdated phone could communicate what I wanted to depict. This piece can be symbolic of the various situations and circumstances of the older population becoming disconnected with their friends, family, or society in general. I decided on using graphite pencil and white pencil in order to convey a monotone coldness of how it feels to be disconnected. This is the process of how I used Dr. Myron as the main reference, as well as how I tested out various backgrounds. This final piece for my sustained investigation is titled Memory, and it was created using a combination of watercolor portraits layered with contour hand drawings compiled in Photoshop. The inspiration behind this piece came from my continuing interest in collage, as well as illustrating the feelings of connection and memories that come from each connection. For this piece, I used faded and rustic shades of watercolor, which were carefully chosen to evoke a feeling of nostalgia and warmth. As we come to the close of my AP Drawing Portfolio exhibition, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who came to experience my artwork. It has been an honor to share my passion for art with you, and I hope that my works have sparked your imagination and challenged your perceptions. I've poured my heart and soul into these pieces, exploring themes that are deeply meaningful to me and experimenting with different techniques and materials. Through this process, I think that I've grown as an artist and as a person, learning to trust my instincts, take risks, and push the boundaries of my own creativity. I want to thank my teachers and mentors who have supported me every step of the way and encouraged me to pursue my artistic vision, and their guidance and wisdom has been invaluable to me, and I am grateful for the opportunity to learn from them. As I reflect on this experience, I am struck by the power of art to connect us, to transcend boundaries and bring us together. And I hope that my artwork has touched your hearts and minds, and that it has inspired you to see the world in a new light. Thank you again for joining me on this journey, and I look forward to continuing to create and to share my art with you in the future.